Did you know that 80% of couples by the age of 65 are forced to continue working or depend on their children for financial stability?
By 65, out of every 100 couples, only one is wealthy. 4 have some form of financial security. 15 have some assets, even though they're living on the edge. And a staggering 80 are in that rat race. They have to keep working or depending on their children for financial security.
And that is why we're inviting you to Couples and Money. Couples and Money is a course that has been developed for couples that helps them have financial conversations. And they deal with issues like what you do with the hoarder and what you do with the spender. How do you support your in-laws? How do you even invest together? How can you even come up with financial goals so that you're growing together as a couple? These are such important issues that trip up couples, which is how they end up in poverty or not being able to really plan their finances together.
You don't have to be a statistic. We believe that every couple, given the right foundation, working in the right community, can actually make it and be part of that small percent of couples who really do well. And so we invite you, sign up for Couples and Money.
Jesus spoke more about money than about heaven and hell put together. And that's a statement I had a speaker talk about once. And I began to ask myself, so why does it seem like there's not enough money in church? Why does it seem like there's such little money going around? There's so many people in church that are struggling financially. So many believers that are struggling. A lot of people in Africa are struggling financially. What is the reason for this? And so as one who's the faith as one who's a believer in Christ, I've kept asking myself this question. If you talk more about money, what was the reason for this? And why does it feel like those that are in church seem to really be struggling? Why does it seem like my family, my community, my race seems to be struggling so much about money? Today, we have a gentleman who will be speaking to us about this. And this gentleman is an expert in communication. Let me just pull up his bio. This gentleman is an expert in communication. That's what he does for a living. And he has spent time working with organizations, working with leaders in different capacities. He's a leadership and organizational performance specialist. He's a keynote speaker and executive trainer. And he uses unique tools and metrics to train organization leaders on how to achieve sustainable results by focusing on non-financial drivers of success, such as trust, building strong stakeholder relationships, and healthy culture, and having purpose that goes beyond profit. He has worked internationally and across Africa with leading organizations and multinationals and has wide consulting experience. He's a trained theologian and as a follower of Christ endeavors to integrate his daily work with God's eternal work of redemption. He has developed and delivered many talks and sermons in practical and marketplace theology to various local and international audiences. He is a husband, he's a father of 2 young adult men, and is a keen mentor. Our speaker for today is none other than Cosma Gatere, who I believe is already in the room. Cosma, karibu sana, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. It's a real honor to share the platform with you. Once again, it's been a while. I'll remind you where it was that we met last time. It's good to see you here. It's good to have you. So feel free to take it away. I'll give you co-hosting rights if you need to share any slides.
Yes, I will be asking to share some Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Froze for a moment there.
Yes. I will be asking to share my screen. So if you could just give me sharing rights.
Yes.
I'll be sharing my screen at some point.
Right, over to you. Then after that, we will have some question and answer. So if you have any questions for Cosma as he carries on, just feel free to put them in the chat and we will be able to ask them at the end of this presentation. Over to you, sir.
So thank you very much, and greetings to everyone. Thank you all for making it a happy new year to all of you. It's a new year 2024, and we're looking forward to what God has in store for us. I am delighted to have this opportunity to share, and as David has just spoken and introduced me, I will be sharing about some of the very radical, very, sometimes you might even say controversial teachings that Jesus has on this whole subject of money. David shared that Jesus, in fact, spoke about money than more topics, probably other than the kingdom of God. And why did he do this? It's because Jesus knew that there's this thing called money that is really central to our lives, but also really messes up our lives. It is for this reason that I think Jesus said that you cannot serve God and money, or mammon, as other translations put it. Now, why did Jesus not say you can't serve God and your career, or God and your spouse, your children, or God and some other big ambition? Why did he focus very much on the question of money? I think it's because he understood that he is trying to teach us some things on this one hand, but on the other hand, there's something contradicting and really undermining everything that he's trying to do to build a relationship with him, and that is money. And as we'll be seeing in what I'll be sharing, if we begin to really understand what Jesus was teaching us about money, it demolishes a lot of our ideas. It demolishes a lot of our pre-held assumptions. Many of those assumptions have actually been developed through history, through our experience, through looking and observing what was happening around us as far as money is concerned as we're growing up, looking at both good examples as well as bad examples of that we have had. And this has really shaped who we are. It's come from books, from movies. I'll be quoting some today. And you find that we have, as individuals, certain approaches. No one comes to the subject of money neutral without, let me say, any baggage. Now, the only question is, what's in this baggage that we bring to money? And you'll be surprised to see that some of the things Jesus says directly contradict. And we find, therefore, that his teachings could be radical, but actually, if we had what you might call the mind of Christ, we would find that there's a lot of work that we need to do to turn around our perspectives. So really, this is a reflection on a few of the very radical teachings that Jesus had about money. And I will be seeing today that if we begin to accept them and practice them, they can be entirely transformational in our lives, in the lives of our families, in the lives of our businesses, and every endeavor that we do in our investments. And it will even contribute to our physical health, because we know that there's actually a very close relationship between our physical wellness and our, but also it has a lot to do with our eternal salvation. That'll be also raising the point that money and how we relate to money has very much to do with where we spend eternity. And all of this is there in this presentation and this discussion that I hope to have today. So let me just start by asking us to engage. And I want to ask us to engage around one question. Do we, and we can actually just post this on the chat. Now, how many side hustles do you have? Now, I presume as good Kenyans, you've got your day job and you've got some side hustles. I remember seeing a survey where someone said that Kenyans on average, have between 4 and 6 side hustles. And I was wondering, in addition to your day job, you must be very, how many side hustles do you have? Just post there, 1, 3, or if you don't have any, just say 0. Just post them in the chat and we'll see how many you have. So I can see one from Wasonga says he has one. Yeah, KM also has one. A number of you have one. Oh, 3. Okay, Janet has one. Pat has 3. Wow. Pastor Shu has 3, yeah. Very interesting. 2 from Faith. Interesting. So I can see that you are certainly very busy Kenyans. Now, I presume, here's a follow-up question. I presume that these side hustles aren't just charities or non-profits. These are actually some method of trying to earn an extra buck, an extra shilling. Here's a question. What is the purpose? What is the purpose of your side hustle? Or you may even say the purpose of your business. Now, this is not saying what is the business. The question is why? Why do you set up that business, that side hustle, that effort to earn an extra buck? Just put in a short comment as to why you have that side hustle. What is the purpose of your business? Let's just see a few comments. Just put in a few comments as to why you're setting up that business. What is the purpose? To give my family a sensible livelihood. Okay. Okay. And KM says, I enjoy doing the hustle. Okay, so the joy of doing it to increase our income, to get an extra coin. Okay, yeah. And an extra buck. Yeah, so a lot of people saying, yes, it's to make more money. Okay, somebody says, as an expression of my purpose to impact people. Kathy and Philip, that's interesting, yeah, to impact people. So actually the focus is actually impact. It's not just yourself. To get petty cash, to save through Chama and so on. Someone else has passion. Okay, to help with the monthly budget. Okay, so that's interesting. And we can see there's clearly a variety of reasons. So not only do we have our day jobs, but I think each and every one of us realizes that, yes, we need to find some way of being entrepreneurial, of investing, of finding a way to earn an extra buck. And many of you are saying that the reason to do that is, to sustain your family, to earn an extra buck, to earn some extra income, and grow in that area. Now, I just want to ask ourselves one question. Luke 12, he teaches us something actually quite controversial and something actually quite radical. Now, notice when I'll just narrate briefly for you what is the summary in this particular encounter that Jesus has one day when he is preaching. And those of you who are familiar with that passage, that he's actually one day going about his preaching. Somebody puts up his hand and says, excuse me, could you please tell my brother to share the inheritance that we have received with me? So probably his brother wasn't giving him a fair shake. And Jesus says, here's what we're going to do. I am not a judge. I am not an arbiter. I am not the one who decides what is a right amount of distribution between you and your brother. Jesus then goes on to talk about a very interesting incident. And then he gives a parable. And this is the parable many of you know in Luke about this rich farmer who has a big harvest, grows his barns. He has, in order to put up more and more barns, he has to demolish his barns in order to build even bigger ones. Why? Because he has such an abundant and a rich harvest. Something else happens. This man also says, I have now got a good and an abundant harvest. I'm now going to lay up for myself all my treasures. I'm going to actually do the following. Sit back, take life easy, and enjoy the rest of my life. So he was saying he's now going to enjoy his retirement. Jesus then says something interesting. He then does an assessment of this man. Now, I'd just like to ask you, if you think of someone who has, first of all, worked hard, maybe this was his core business and not his side business. So he's actually worked hard, but then secondly, he's saved. If you could actually just move to this slide over here. If you could move to slide number 8. Yeah. And then if you could put it in slide view, so that we just see one slide, number 8. Yeah. So essentially, this is what Jesus is now looking at. This man has actually accumulated so much, but Jesus says, "You are a fool." And he actually does this in the context of something we call greed. Now, how many of you watched the movie Greed is Good? It's a bit of an older movie, Michael Douglas there to the left, featuring as Gordon Gekko, and there's a good sequel to this. And there's a famous quote from this movie where he says, "Greed, for a lack of a better term, is good." And he says, "Greed is healthy, it's kind, it's great." And he goes on talking and extolling the virtues of greed. Jesus, on the other hand, gives us a very different perspective. Here's what he says in Luke 12. "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Now, notice the contrast between what we're told in the world, that greed is good, and what Jesus tells us, that greed is actually toxic to our souls. Now, I don't know if any of you in your business, in your corporate life, have ever come across what is called shareholder theory. Now, those of you in the corporate world who are in business and so on might have heard that. Basically, shareholder theory says this in summary. It says the purpose of a company is to maximize the profits of its shareholder, to maximize the profits of its shareholder, as long as you do this without any fraud or deception. So it says that actually, if we can maximize our profits, which to translate really means make you, who's the owner of the business, as rich as possible, yeah, let's actually call it what it is. Let's call it what it is. It's actually you becoming as rich as possible. You are actually doing what a company is meant to do. David, if you could project slide number 7. Slide number 7 talks about this. Slide number 7. This is really the theory that was proposed by Milton Friedman, a famous economist. He did this in 1974, came up with this theory, and this is a theory that actually influenced business throughout the world. If any of you have been to business training, got a business degree, a BBA, an MBA, done any theory in this in a local university, in a university overseas, this is the doctrine that you are exposed to. The shareholder theory basically said, we as the investors, as the shareholders, invest, and what you guys as workers, as staff, as employees, as suppliers, as vendors, as all the other people who come to work, are working to maximize the profits for me who has invested. Now, I want you to notice something from this parable of Jesus, that this shareholder theory is exactly what we see in this parable in Luke chapter 12. We have a shareholder. We have someone who actually does exactly what Milton Friedman is saying. He invests, he has a big return, and he's maximizing his shareholder benefit. He has the foresight to actually say that this is something I'm doing for myself. Now, just project slide number 6. Slide number 6 actually shows you that this was someone who had the Friedman doctrine and was a Friedman follower even before Friedman. He's somebody I call who had an eye problem. He says he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Now look at everything in red. This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty to eat later for many years. Take it easy and drink. This is someone who, just as Friedman is saying, is maximizing shareholder benefit for who? For himself. He's actually a disciple of Friedman even before the Friedman doctrine. Now, it's interesting to see that this is a man also who has a very good pension laid up for himself. He's got a retirement plan. He's not relying on his children as a pension. So any of you who are, thinking of relying on your children as a pension, this man is doing the very opposite. He's actually got his future laid up for himself. Surprise, surprise, Jesus comes to him and says, you fool, you fool. What is Jesus thinking? Put up slide number 9, David, slide number 9. Jesus' assessment of this is that actually this obsession, number 9, yeah, there, this obsession with investing, and even if you do it without deception or fraud, which is what Friedman is saying, you're foolish. Now, notice in this doctrine, in this parable, there's no suggestion of fraud or corruption or injustice or intimidation or abuse of office. He was actually doing things honestly and ethically. But Jesus still says, in other words, to be hardworking, to be honest, to have a lot of money saved up, to save in a good agricultural practice, because he was even reducing what you call post-harvest losses by putting up a big barn. You see, in Kenya, they say you have 30% post-harvest losses. That's partly why we have a food situation. He was even improving on that. Jesus says, even that is foolish. And even to have your future laid out for you, so you're not relying on others for your pension or children. Jesus says, this is foolish. It just kind of blows your mind. Because if this is foolish, then surely what is wisdom? I haven't stolen. I haven't taken a bribe. I'm not relying on others for my pension. I want to enjoy my retirement. I'm not wasting my crop. I'm saving it. What is Jesus really going at here? It kind of really tells you that the mind of Christ is different from the mind that we have, and that you really need to have spiritual eyes to discern spiritual things. The things of the Spirit are spiritually discerned. I think the hint for this comes in what we see. If you can put up slide number 5. Slide number 5. That this man was foolish, rich, although he was ethical. I want us to distinguish between 3 things, and maybe you can take notes and write down this. That what is Jesus really looking at here? He's distinguishing between things. First of all, to be rich unto oneself, or to be rich unto God. And that's what Jesus goes on to say, that so will it be. He says, you fool, today your soul is taken from you, and whose will this be when you leave? In other words, where you go. So he was told 2 things. Today's your dying day. And secondly, when you die, all of this money that you have saved in big barns, you've taken, even if it is without, you've taken it fairly, you've earned it fairly, whose will it be? He's telling us something else. What is the purpose of business? That the purpose of business goes beyond myself. That's why I asked you that question earlier. That the purpose of business, the purpose of your side hustle, the purpose of that is an extra buck, even if you're doing it honestly and ethically. And I presume the people on this forum would at least be doing it and honestly and ethically. You don't have the problems of trying to use fraud and corruption to gain an extra buck. That is not enough. Jesus says the purpose of business goes beyond profit. So Jesus is also saying, secondly, the purpose of business is not to max shareholder return. It is not just to look after the interest of the holder. It is important I want us to notice. You need to ask yourself in your side hustle, your business, your investment, who are the stakeholders beyond the shareholder, you, the investor, that are going to benefit? Who are some of the stakeholders that you are introducing into this discussion? One, who are a key beneficiary should be your staff. Are your staff enjoying and benefiting from this business, or is it just you? Are those slaves and workhorses who you're whipping and you extract all the profit? Or are you thinking genuinely and hard and sincerely about the welfare of your staff? Secondly, your suppliers or your vendors, how are they benefiting? Because you need them in order to succeed as a shareholder. Three, think about the community around whom and around which you engage for business. You don't exist and operate your business in cyberspace or in the skies. You've got a community. The community could be virtual, but more often physical, and even you're located in a certain area. Are they also enjoying the benefits of that investment of yours? The government, through the taxes and the contribution you're making, as well as all the consumers who are actually going to consume your product, because your consumers are meant to be getting something that is adding value. The purpose of business is not just to make money. The purpose of business is to add value, but do it at a profit. To sell or to produce, to manufacture and sell something that will add value, make a contribution, but to do so at a profit. An NGO or a non-profit does the same thing. They're adding value, but not at a profit. You want to add value to make a difference in somebody's life with a product, with a service, with something that you're selling, but to doing so at a profit. That consumer must be getting genuine value addition because of your business. Jesus, way ahead of his time, was contradicting the shareholder theory with what today in business environments, people talk about the stakeholder theory. David introduced me and said that, I give executive seminars, and these are the things we even teach today. That organizational leaders, when I'm training a board of directors, I tell them, think about your stakeholders and not just about the shareholder. The shareholder is one stakeholder. Jesus was actually teaching stakeholder theory. He didn't use the words way before it was introduced, and saying that a business exists for more than the person who is investing. My encouragement to you would be to really, as you think about your investments in life, as you think about becoming one of those, wealthy companies and individuals that are going to be grown as a result of this journey we're doing together, think about benefiting more than yourself. We're not saying anywhere here that the shareholder suffers a loss, because if you continue suffering losses perpetually as a business, you're going to run out of into trouble. So you need to generate a profit. But is there a purpose beyond profit? Or is the only purpose of your business to make money and then to make money for yourself? That should be of concern to you. Something else I want us to think about. David, just put up again that slide number 5. Slide number 5. Now, here you see this person who is yes, this one. Just go into this one now. Look at this picture. Forget even the literature on the right. Just look at that man in his retirement. Now he says that I have got laid up for myself, plenty of grain, laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. In other words, he's saying this is my retirement plan. Now, just look at that picture. Put in the discussion, what do you see? What is your comment about spending retirement as that man is spending it, represented in that picture? Just look at that picture. If that's your retirement, you can see his barn, you can see his big mansion, you can see his cows, you can see his, and that is you in retirement. Do you have any concerns? Does this just make you think about something? If that was you in retirement, I just want to see a few comments on the chat box. Just post what comes to mind. Don't overthink it. Just post a few things that this conjures up in your mind when you see this. If this was you in retirement. And this is a man who's got plenty. Anything you see that's maybe right to that picture, anything wrong, anything it triggers a thought, any comments you see from that that picture there? Any comments? Yeah, someone says planning at its best. Someone says, I hope the sitting is not all that he's doing. Anything else? Somebody says there, CNM, Monique and Grace, man looks content, but alone. He has retired well comfortable, non-involvement of family in his money matters, no consultation. Now, interesting. Let me just comment on what Monique has said. He needs others. Lonely, I think he needs others. Yeah, looks lonely at the top. You guys are getting it. So Oscar says, yeah, lonely. Dream retirement plan achieved. Lonely, I think he needs others. So, interesting. You see, there seems to be no room for greater good. Yeah, good. So it's interesting you're seeing exactly what Jesus saw with this man's problem. He says, you know what? You've done very well agriculturally. You have saved, but you know what? Your whole universe revolves around yourself. Again, it comes back to the eye problem you said. Wasn't there a child in the neighborhood he could benefit? Wasn't there an orphan, a neighbor, a widow, some community project that he could give his money to? This is what Jesus says. Who will all this money go to? He is not thinking about anybody else. Now, here's another point I want you to write down. And this is an interesting thing. Jesus is actually telling him this. Retirement is actually not just financial, but also relational. Let me say that again, and I want you to note it. Please write it down. And this is something that even when you're young, you want to start thinking and investing, and I know you're thinking about retirement and begin, the sooner you start thinking about it, the better. Retirement is not just financial, but also relational. Secondly, your pension, he talks about his pension. I have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take it, life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Pension is not just financial, but relational. Here is a concept I want to leave you with. What is your relational pension? This is what Jesus actually comes to him with in the last sentence. He says this, today, your soul is required of you. That is, he's talking about what is your relationship with God. This man had no vertical relationship. Secondly, he says, whose will this be? He did not have any horizontal relationship. No relationship with anybody. As many of you have noticed, the guy is so rich, but so alone. So alone. Pension is actually relational. Horizontal, you've got a relationship with others in the community, with your friends, with other people you can impact. But pension is also relational, which is vertical relationship with God, which means it's also got a spiritual dimension. And so does business. Jesus is saying, what was wrong with this business model of shareholder supremacy and thinking about only me, myself, and I, is that you need to think about the relational dimensions of your business. Here is something that I'd also want you as couples, as you make your investments, please remember, what are the relationships I'm building? I mentioned some of them earlier with stakeholders and so on, and suppliers and vendors. Let somebody leave your business or leave an experience with you saying, I would always want to have a repeat transaction, or to work for that person again, or to buy from them again, or to be served by them again, because the relationship, the experience was so good. But is there something that goes beyond that? God looks at you and says, well done, good and faithful servant. What is the spiritual dimension? That's the relational dimension of your business. Always remember that you're doing this to be a blessing to others. And you have got to think about those relational dimensions. By the way, a lot of research has been done, and this is something that I even do, there's a lot of research that I bring up in my seminars, which shows this, that if you want to be happy in retirement, what will make you happy is not just your money, but more importantly, it's your relationships. It's true beyond, you need a certain threshold. You shouldn't be worrying about, am I going to put food on the table? Am I going to fuel my car? Will I have money to go and maybe visit somebody and a friend, or go and see my children or my grandchildren? You shouldn't be worried about those things. But that threshold is fairly low. Beyond that threshold, what really makes you happy is the quality of your relationships. And you'll find that it does two things. It keeps you healthy, but it also gives you longevity. That longevity, if you want long life and you want a healthy life, what will actually boost it is the quality of your relationships and not just the amount of your money. So this is something we rarely think about as people who are investing. We think about that what will really make me happy is much money. Here's someone who has so much money, but actually he was going to be miserable. So this is just something interesting that Jesus tells us. One of his most radical teachings is that there's a purpose beyond profit, that pension is relational as well as financial, that you need to think about stakeholders, not just one shareholder who is yourself. Yes, I know you want to make a profit. We're all agreed about that. Profit, by the way, is not a dirty word. Profit in the Bible tells us it is God who teaches you to profit. By that verse, people stop the verse there. The verse goes on to say, and shows you the way you should go. He shows us the way we should achieve that profit. And that profit is not just by thinking about yourself, it's by thinking about who I can be a blessing to at a profit through the skills and services God has given. So this is one of the most radical teachings I see Jesus telling us. But let me just go on to another one. Another teaching that I find Jesus telling us is that what this man is talking about here at the end. He talks about, Jesus says, so will it be. He goes on in that parable. I'm just narrating for you what he goes on to say in chapter 12. He goes on to say this. So will it be with people who are rich towards God, rich towards themselves, but not rich towards God. And Jesus then goes on to talk about a parable about worry. So he says, therefore, do not worry. Do not worry about what you will eat, what you will dress, what you will have. Because he says that even the pagans worry about these things. The pagans worry about things, but you should actually be concerned about following him. There's another contrast I want us to do, and this is to write down the difference, and write this down in notes. What is the difference between work and worry? So work and worry. And then also write down there the difference between, second thing, growth and greed. So here's a man who was growing, but he fell into the trap of being greedy. Remember, Jesus started this when he started by telling that person who said, share the inheritance. He started by saying, teach me, Jesus said, beware about every kind of greed. And that's why I started with the greed is good parable. That's why Jesus started by saying, greed is not good, as we've been told in the movies. Greed is actually toxic. And then he goes to show that this is an example, exhibit A, of someone who was greedy. Everything he was doing was for himself. So I'm asking you a question. You're growing your business, that side hustle, your daily business, your investment. You're growing, that's a legitimate enterprise. How do you then grow without being greedy? How do you work without worrying? That is the second thing Jesus goes on to say in that parable. How do you work without worrying? And how do you grow? Jesus, by the way, does not condemn him for his rich harvest, for his abundant harvest. So he's not saying having a bumper crop and doing good agriculture practice is bad. He condemns him for his greed. And we can maybe have a discussion about that later. But think about that. Worry versus work. You go to work, but are you working? Are you investing because you're worried about the future? Are you growing your business, investing, saying, let me expand, I have a bigger store, a bigger premise, let me open a new branch, let me expand, because you're greedy? Or are you doing it because you want to grow? Now, here is something that we need to learn, is that is that growth versus greed is actually cured by something else called generosity. That dilemma of how much you grow versus how much is greed is cured by something called generosity. And David, when you're sharing, I was very happy to see that one of the things that you'll be, the topics we'll be addressing here is actually generosity. So as you think about growing your business or your side hustle, as you think about investment, we've already talked about thinking about more stakeholders than just me, the shareholder. We've talked about the spiritual dimension. We've talked about, growth and working hard. That's legitimate. But do not worry. And is worry what is driving you? Because if what is worry is driving you, you'll find that you'll do the following. You will clutch and keep everything to yourself and make the possessions your security and not God as your security. We need to remember our provider is not our business or our profit. Our provider is God. And if we make our possessions, our investment, our growth, our security, we're making worry the means to and the motive behind our work. And we're making growth and endless growth and endless growth and endless acquisition the purpose of our business, and we therefore find it results in greed. And somebody like this person who has got greed as his motive, and he was worried, that's why he had to build bigger and bigger. And he says, now I've got a long horizon, a long retirement planned out for me. He's actually not generous. And that is what Jesus condemned him about. So generosity is the cure. Anytime you're thinking about growth, think about generosity. Anytime you're thinking about work, don't just think about worry, but think about generosity. So Jesus says that. And he says that when he goes on to talk about that in Luke, that if we worry, if God, when he talks about it, he says, do not worry about your life. And he says, don't worry about the basic things, what you will eat, about your body, what you will wear. Where he says, life is more than food and the body is more than clothes. He says, consider the birds. He says that God clothes them and looks after them. But he says, if God looks after them, you are more valuable than these birds, and God will also look after you. And he condemns us, those of us who are so concerned about accumulation and looking at possessions as your security. He condemns us and says this. He says, do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink, and do not worry about it. Growth is important. Growth is good. You don't want to stagnate. But is that your sole obsession? Is worry what is driving you? And he says, because your father knows that you need them. He says the pagans, if you're doing that, you're actually thinking like a pagan. You're thinking like someone who has got no heavenly father. There's no thought in your mind that God knows that you need to eat. He knows that you need to clothe your children. He knows that you need school fees. He knows that you need to pay rent. God knows, because you're his child. He does that for the birds. You're more valuable to him than the birds. And he says, but that's where he goes on to say, seeking his kingdom first, and all these things will be given to you. So I just want us to make sure that you think about that broader perspective. One final thought about this man before we leave him is that I don't know if you realize that this is the only part in the Bible where retirement is actually mentioned and described in detail. Retirement actually is something you don't find in the Bible. And it's interesting to see that the man who had the best, most productive, richest endowment, best insurance plan for retirement was actually called a fool. I mean, that one I don't even want to elaborate. I mean, just go figure. Just go figure. The person who has the best retirement laid out for himself was actually called a fool. And yet we're told that the purpose of our careers, the purpose of our business is to save up for retirement and then go and enjoy, just like this man. This is where this retirement is best described in the Bible. And he's called a fool. And I think I've given the reasons partly why, but it also shows, and that's a topic for another day, at retirement, this thing about sitting back, laying idle, thinking only about yourself, is not a biblical concept. I know a lot of the insurance industry and many whatever tend to promote and market to us, telling us buy this insurance investment, buy this, and plan for secure your retirement. This guy had the most excellent, I don't know which even insurance company. This is the best insurance plan he had, because many years, laid up, you see, nothing could come high, a storm or high water, droughts, another pandemic comes, the guy is sorted. He's called a fool. So just go figure. And that's something that I think we can discuss later. I wanted us just, and I'll just be giving you one or two more thoughts, and then we can have a discussion. Is just to think about this. Something else we see in this person's life is that he had money as his God. He had money as his God. This is back to what Jesus was telling us, that we should not worship God and mammon. God and mammon. You can have a very religious life. This man, we don't know about his religion. He probably didn't have any. But you can have a very religious life and yet still have mammon as your God. David just put up slide number 2. Slide number 2 tells us about another encounter with Jesus. This slide, yes, this one. This is the encounter between Jesus and the rich ruler. Now here, we know about someone who was, one, very religious, he was young, and he was also wealthy. And some of you might fall into that category. You're very religious, you're young, and some of you are wealthy, or some of you are planning to be wealthy, but you're doing well. And this man comes to Jesus and says, "Good master, what more shall I do?" And Jesus, looking at his heart, he was able to look at somebody's heart and tell what is the problem. He says, you don't need more ritual, more rules, more commandments, because Jesus says, and he tells Jesus, all those commandments I've observed since I was a young person. Jesus says, one more thing you lack. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. Now, again, here's another interesting teaching about Jesus, very radical. Jesus would tell some people, based on what he sees in their hearts, that what? There's one thing stopping you from your eternal relationship with me, and that is money. And this was an example. Here was someone who, being very religious, but religious in terms of a ritualistic way, he was ritualistic in his religion, who was keeping commandments very keenly, but when it came to a choice between who is ultimately sitting on the throne of my life, is it God or is it money? He chose his money. Because here, what happened is that he turned away when he was told this and walked away, it says, very sad, because he was very wealthy. Here's another thing we need to remember. We're told we must grow our investment, we must invest. And, I'm sure you'll get into different, mechanisms about how to invest. But is acquisition and accumulation of wealth the ultimate goal? Jesus warns us, and we're warned in other passages, that money has this way of soon taking preeminence in our lives. And not only does it do that, it actually replaces the preeminence that only Jesus should hold in our lives. This man had one problem. He says that he has obeyed all the commandments. He had only broken the first one, which was, you shall have no other God before me. He had one God, and that God was money. It's interesting to see how many commandments out of the 10 commandments speak about money. That's the first one. Do not have any other God. You should not worship mammon and worship God instead. How about do not steal? Talks about money. Do not covet. And covetousness, which is the 10th commandment, actually leads to people breaking all the other commandments. This is why the Bible says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. That's what that passage means. People often misread it. It really means all kinds of evil, whether it's murder, whether it's stealing. People have committed adultery, we know, because of money. Yeah, we know that people, either want to work their way up or want to do something and give, sexual favors in order because of money. Envying your neighbor's property and so on, dishonoring your parents because of money. All these kinds of evil come from breaking the first commandment, having a love for mammon instead of God, and the 10th commandment, which is covetousness. And covetousness means keeping for yourselves and looking at other people's things and saying, you know what, I want that for myself. All of those have one vital missing ingredient. There is no generosity. And that is what Jesus is trying to tell this man here. You know what? Your problem has been getting. Yes, you have been trying to compensate by being religious. But Jesus says, no, I want you to know that trying to compensate and not make up for generosity by trying to be religious actually doesn't impress me, because I can still see that you're still holding everything to yourself. And maybe my final example, which I just gave from Jesus' radical teachings, is his encounter with Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was the tax collector. And here you can put up slide number 3. David, which shows Jesus' encounter there with Zacchaeus. Again, you know the story. Zacchaeus, Jesus is passing. Zacchaeus hears Jesus passing. He climbs up to the tree because he's a short man. Jesus goes into his house, invites himself into his house. We don't know what happens inside the house. There's an encounter, an interaction, the discussion between them. What we see thereafter is the description of what Jesus says about this man. Now, I want us to keep this example of what Jesus says here, and this is in Luke chapter 18. You can go and read it later. What he says about this person's approach to money, and how Jesus says this is so radically different from the two previous examples we've seen. Jesus says something interesting about Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 18. He says that here, I'll just read it out for us. He says that this is a man, and by the way, we all know that tax collectors were very rapacious. That's the word we're saying there. They were extortionate. They would take more than what was required, keep some for themselves, and only give the surplus to the Romans. So they were hated. In the Bible, some of the worst examples of a human being, you're told, is a tax collector. Paul says, you know, if you don't provide, you've disowned the faith, and you're worse than a tax collector. It was the worst form of human being you could have. And so this person was a chief tax collector. So he was the worst of the worst. After the encounter with Jesus and this man, Jesus said this, that what do we see this man doing? First of all, we see the generosity. He says, first of all, anything I've stolen from people, and he had stolen a lot, taken it illegally, he says he'll give back 4 times. But before that, he says that all of my money, I'll first of all give half of it to the poor. So notice, here is one person who says of his own volition, without any prompting from Jesus, after his encounter with Jesus, that I am going to be what? What's that vital missing word, that other G that we talked about? He's going to be generous. Here's someone who says, I am going to bless people. I'm just going to give half of all I possess to the poor, to the widows, something that the first guy who was retired didn't do, something that this second person was told to go and sell didn't do. He doesn't stop there. He goes on and says, anything I have taken unjustly, in the wrong way from these people, I will now give back 4 times. And by the way, the law only required that to give 1.25 times. So he's actually giving it by several multiples higher. But Jesus goes on to say something else. He says that this person has now proved that he is a true child of Abraham, and salvation has truly come into this house. Surprisingly, Jesus says true salvation comes into a homestead, into an individual's life, into the life of a couple, once they demolish the god called Mammon, and they prove it. They prove it by being generous. And why does he bring in Abraham into the discussion? Because Abraham was told to be a blessing, and through you, in Genesis 12, through you, God said, I'll bless you, and through you, all people on earth will be blessed. So here was someone using his resources, using his business. And by the way, we don't see him going, Jesus telling him to stop his tax collecting. We can only assume that he went back, but now he was an honest tax collector and told the other people who are under him also to be honest. So God told him, stay in your profession, but now do it ethically. But here it was not just someone who was ethical and honest. He was thinking about the other stakeholders. He blesses people, 50% given freely. But then he also is now blessing other people and saying, I want this to be a blessing to others, and multiplying it 4 times. Anything he's taken through injustice, through extortion, he then repays. So I just want to end my comments there and say that I think we just need to be people who understand that Jesus actually says we prove our salvation. Jesus says salvation has truly come into this house, true salvation, when he saw what they did with money. He didn't tell him salvation has come into your house because you are leading a Bible study, or because you are an usher in church, or because you sing in the worship team. He said, true salvation to me comes when I see what you have done with this thing called money. My encouragement to you as young couples is, as you think about your investment, as you think about growing a business, have this broader perspective, this mindset. Let this mind that was in Jesus Christ about money be also in you. Think generous and generously about blessing. Let your business grow, but don't let growth be as a path to greed. Let it be a path to generosity. Work and work hard and work excellently, because we should autograph our work with excellence as followers of Christ. But let work not lead you to worry. Don't just think about a financial pension, about the future. Think about a relational pension. Think about blessing the stakeholders and map out as many stakeholders as you want, not just you, the shareholder. And think about a purpose of business that goes beyond profit, and never make God your money your God. Let God be the one who's going to rule and be the governor, the God of your money. Let me just stop there and open it up for discussion or questions.
Wow, those were such amazing thoughts on this subject. And I really like the way you framed it. It's just radical teachings on money. As I'm listening to you, I'm like, wow. When you sit in these sessions, and I moderate a number of these sessions, at some point it feels like I've had this before, but there's always some newness. And today I'm like, which scripture do you read again? But anyway, there's an interesting question coming here from Jenny. And I quote, this route economy, we have Kenyans working but not being adequately compensated. So many are not getting paid despite working. And that's happening to a lot of even young businesses. And you talked about young businesses. High school fees also is a barrier to couples being able to save for the future. Pension years putting away money for pension has become a story. And they give the example of the West, where there is good quality education, free primary and secondary education, allowing families to invest in their pension. What are your recommendations, seeing as most families do not earn enough to even meet their monthly expenses?
So some of the, yes, I understand where you're coming from. I think we're all feeling the pain of the the current financial times, and I'll just say a couple of things. One, I think we need to be wise stewards. So that wasn't for this session. I wanted actually today just to focus on the broad, the thought patterns and the mindset. But I'm sure in the other sessions you're getting into the mechanics. How much do you invest in stocks versus a business? Just knowing the dynamics of a business. What's the difference between your cash flow and your profit? What is your your sales cycle? How do you boost your sales, and how do you use different strategies to improve your marketing and so on. So I think we just need to be skillful and get those practical, tangible skills in terms of how we grow businesses and how we steward money, because money is really God's resources. Psalm 50 verse 1 says the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. He gives us to steward. So we need to first of all be responsible. I learned that. But then also we need to be more financially literate. Do we know, for instance, the other day I was looking at, do I make an investment in an apartment to get rent, or do I put what are the alternatives? And I was surprised to see, I don't know if maybe we don't have the time to put out a question here. What is the return on a 90-day treasury bill? Treasury bill return at the moment is giving you a yield of 15%. There's a small withholding tax that will be taken off that, but 15% is a staggering return for something that is fixed, that is risk-free, And yet, even if I was to get my apartment and rent it or do Airbnb, you do your annual yield, you're not getting 15%. Many people get apartments and they don't even know what is my annual percentage yield. And I'm talking about an annual percentage yield because you can compare it with, first of all, the benchmark of inflation. Yeah, people, if I was to ask again, some of us don't even know in Kenya what is the current inflation rate. So you've got to say that investment I'm doing, how does it outmatch inflation? How much does it outmatch the risk-free guaranteed return which is given by the government yield? If I'm going to put in my blood, sweat, and tears, wake up every day and sweat, and how much more am I getting above this risk-free yield? So that is just pure financial literacy. And it's got nothing to do with the root to economy. We don't even know how to, how to be smart with money. I feel one of the biggest disservices, you mentioned education. We never train our children to be financially literate and business savvy. It should be a mandatory course in our, starting from primary schools, now with CBC, teaching them, basic sales skills, teaching them financial numeracy and literacy, and teaching them, these things of, what is a proxy for inflation and so on, so I can know and be smart with money. And many of us are actually our own enemies because we end up working poor, and we also are not saving, and then we end up retiring poor. It's not good for us, it's not good for our families, and it's not also honoring to God, because God, the wealth belongs to God, and we're his stewards. We should actually have some of that for our good and for the benefit of this community. So I think we need to be financially steward. And then also, I always believe, pray for wisdom, because God, some of the things he gives us by revelation. Some revelation, he can give you an insight. Do this business idea and not this. Get together as a pool of ladies and go somewhere and buy some goods in wholesale, and then you spread that, so you're buying per unit bar of soap or per unit cooking oil, much less than what you'd buy at an Ivers. The men come together and go to Kajiado and slaughter a whole cow, and each of you one guy takes some kono, amgu, and whatever. It's so much cheaper than going to the butchery and buying meat at 700 or 800, per kilo, whatever you buy it at. So some of this wisdom, God can also give the insight. So I know it's tough times, but I think there are solutions out there and we can learn them.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned about that. It's not only chicken that is sold in quarters. Ivan says government yields being high may not necessarily be a good thing because of crowding out effect. Small businesses can't access credit for growth, which leads to tougher times for us all. I guess that was a comment that Evans was making there. But the Monekis have a question. With the push that we exert in growing our incomes, what are the signs that indicate that one is being overtaken by greed? Things are growing, business is going forward, it's looking good. What are the signs that we are being overtaken by greed?
Yeah. I think the best example I could give you is really to refer you to the scripture in where Paul in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, it's probably some of the most extensive teachings about generosity in the Bible. And there we're given the example that our example is Jesus Christ himself, who being rich for our sakes became poor, so that we who are poor could inherit his riches. He gave up everything he had in heaven to come and help us, so that we could, through salvation, inherit his material and spiritual, riches and benefits. Paul there gives the examples of the Macedonians. And he says these people were poor. He was out doing a harambe for the famine which was back in Judea. And he goes to the Macedonians and he says, I want you to know that these people who are desperately poor, it resulted in overwhelming generosity. You see? And Paul says that actually poverty and having little money does not mean you should be stingy. He says those two, that's not an equation that works, you see. You can actually be, in fact, it doesn't say poor, he says desperately poor. So many of us, I don't think those of us here are desperately poor. You could be struggling, but I don't think we're there yet. But he says, look at the generosity. And then he says something interesting. As you grow in all these other graces, and talks about your speech, your wisdom, and so on, he says, see that you also grow in the grace of giving. So that is what I'd like to encourage you. The answer to that question is, how much are you growing in your giving? Now, going back to tithing, even if you use 10% as a benchmark for tithe, 10% is maybe where you started when you first got to know Christ. That could be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ago. Where are you today? Have you grown in the grace of giving? Are you still at 10? First of all, you need to ask yourself, are you at the 10%? Now, even if you're not, even if you started maybe because of real financial situation, you started slower than that. Let's say even 3%, 5%. Have you grown? Now, tell me, which other area of your life in the past 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, have you not grown? You've grown in your skills, in your competence. You've probably grown in your wisdom. You've grown in you're driving a better car. Maybe you've moved to a different neighborhood. Are you a parent? Are you a mother or a father? Your child. If your child is born and does not grow, you immediately run to the doctor. It's called stunted growth. You know that lack of growth is unnatural. Talk to me about your education. When you start at class 1, if you don't grow, you repeat. Your parents know that there's a problem. It's not natural. Why have we accepted that growth, stagnation in the area of giving is normal? It's the one area of our life that we don't want to grow. And we accept it as normal. It is abnormal. Jesus saw the tree that was not productive. He cursed it. It's not normal for the tree not to be producing. Grow, produce some fruit. Why have we accepted when it comes to giving, to generosity, no growth is acceptable? Even regression is acceptable. It's a mindset that is not right. So if you read 2 Corinthians 9:17, also we're made rich. Why? You'll be made rich in every way, so that you can be generous on every occasion. So the purpose of your richness is actually to be generous. You see, look at Ephesians 4:29. It talks about not stealing. And the problem about not stealing is really you're not giving. Why? It says this: the thief who steals should, first of all, stop stealing. Stole 5 things. Stop stealing, number 1. Secondly, work. Then do honest work. So not just don't stop stealing and then start doing drugs. That's not honest work. Work with your own hands. Don't benefit from somebody else's. But what is the purpose of all honest work, working with your own hands? So that you may have something to give, share with those in need. The whole purpose of not stealing, starting to steal, is to work hard so that you may have something to do what? To give. You see? And Paul, when he was leaving in Acts chapter 20, when he's leaving Ephesus, he says, "You have been witnesses that with my own hands I showed you how, as a Christian, you must work, be diligent, and work, provide for myself, because it is more blessed to give than to receive." He says that if I'm not giving, if I'm not generous, I'm not really doing what a Christian should be doing. So we just need to realize that. To me, I think there's no formula to say that 20% of a business to grow. I think you grow, let your business grow and prosper as much as God enables it. You see, if God blesses you to grow and get branches, grow overseas and start exporting, God bless you. But always remember, it's meant to be a means to a blessing. And one final thought is just from a key verse I like is Proverbs 11:24. Which is a verse you should write down and you should actually go and read, which says, "One person gives and becomes even wealthier. Another one holds back more than what is right and ends up only in poverty." And the thought you're being told there is that your daily work, even that mshahara which you get, even that business return, part of it, a legitimate claim of that, part of that amount legitimately belongs to others. It's not all yours because it's God who enables you to work. It's God who enables you to make wealth. So the Bible is telling us there, you can hold back more than what is right. Other translation says, hold back more than what is just or more than what is fair. So the idea that because I've earned a salary, it's all mine, or because I made a business, it's all mine, is not a biblical idea. The Bible says God is the one who's enabled you to work. So part of that legitimately, rightfully, belongs to others. If you hold back more than what is right, you end up in poverty. But you give and generously, you end up prospering and your business will even grow further.
Cosma, I want to join with Duncan Eric, who says, wow, amazing, amazing thoughts here. And Susan Nganga just sent the emoji for thinking about these things deeply. Maybe just some comments from other people here. Ariel says, interesting insights. God bless you, Cosmos, for the value added. Felicia says, the purpose of richness is generosity and giving. Duncan Eric says, stop stealing work so that you have something to give. Very insightful. And he says we should have around 2 with you. Then Susan closes with thanks. Cosma, just amazing thoughts. And thank you so much for taking your time this evening to just be with us, to encourage us, but more than that, to challenge us on this journey of wealth. It is not about making money. It's not about us hefty pension and living comfortably. Another mentor of ours and partner of a ministry or a part of the Apostle Moses Mukisa says, generosity is repentance from poverty. Thank you so much, Cosma. We really appreciate you. May God continue to enrich you. And we really are joining with Duncan in hoping that we can have a round two, even if it's in our mid-season sometime, to just hear more about these insightful thoughts and radical teachings from Jesus Christ himself. Sante. So,
thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. You're welcome. Right, so we will be wrapping up in just about a minute or two. And what we want to do is just invite any one of you who has listened to this and is like, I want to tap into that financial literacy. I want to be able to teach my kids. I want to gain that wisdom about how to manage my money and how we as a couple can manage and grow our wealth. And you just need to be able to get more information about couples and money events. Just save the number +254 797 984343, and one of our names and hosts will put in the chat. Just save that number, and we will be able to send you the updates for different couples and money events. Upcoming, we have another open day next week on the 11th of January. We will be talking about 6 tips for growing and preserving your wealth with Ben Mandy. You cannot afford to miss it, and we'll be using the same link that we used today, which we'll also be putting on the chat very shortly. Beyond that, to sign up for the next season, Couples and Money, which launches on the 18th of January, and classes will open right after that. We will please sign up on our website, couplesnmoney.com. It had already been put in the chat and will be put up again so that then we can continue to engage with you. So for next week's open day, you can register using this link I've just put in there. For signing up for Couples and Money, saying I want to be part of this, I want to improve my financial literacy around money, www.couplesmoney.com. Of course, if you want to get more information about what's happening in Couples and Money, save the number 0797 984343. If you're not in Kenya, +254 797 984343, and we'll be more than glad to have you. Maybe just to another 3 or so minutes to just give you some insights on what to expect in the Couples and Money conversation. And I put this up before, but just for the sake of those who joined us a little later, these are some of the topics that we cover the 10-week program. So we talk about how to handle our money, different backgrounds, and how that impacts the way we handle our money. We talk about different temperaments and how that affects the way we approach money. We have some real talk. How do we have a safe money conversation where somebody doesn't break down into tears and where people are not raising their voices and completely not understanding each other? We talk about the purpose of earning money, which Cosma has touched on today. We talk about the money journey, investing, what are our investment goals for every decade of our lifetime. There's a way to invest for the decade that you're in or for the season in life that you're in. Then we talk about the debt trap, when we've borrowed for the sake of, for good reasons many times, and we find ourselves trapped. How do we get out of those traps? Living sustainably, how do we live a lifestyle that we can manage within our financial situation, but also achieve our financial goals without stress? Then how do we build our net worth? Understanding how to invest well together and grow our net worth. Then the power of giving, which Cosma has really packed in there. How do we grow in this money principle of generosity and giving? And then last but not least, teaching kids about money. How do we process the importance of passing those good money habits. We do money the way we do money today because of the habits that we learned, whether we were taught or we just observed. And so these are some of the things that we will be talking about in Couples and Money. So if you want to be part of this, as you grow your financial literacy, please sign up www.couplesandmoney.com. It's been wonderful having you all here, and we just want to close with a word of prayer as we commit our lives to God. There are different situations represented here, and so we just want to commit those situations into God's hands, that no matter where you find yourself today, God is able to turn that situation around. And if you need to talk to someone about a situation that you're in, please also reach out to that number, 0797 984 343 or +254 797 984 343. And we will have a conversation and unpack how you can navigate that situation. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for every couple, every person that has been in this session today, whether they were invited or they found themselves and stumbled on an ad and found themselves here. Lord, you have a reason and a purpose for them. For every relationship, for every marriage, for every individual that has been here today, you know the deepest desires of their hearts. You know the deepest needs of every heart, of every person that is here. And so we pray that King of Kings, you will answer them in their place of need. That you who knows the deepest secrets, the deepest cries, the deception of the heart, you know, and you are able to address, for nothing is impossible for you. And so as they hear the sound of my voice today and say, I really am that person and I need your intervention, oh God, that because of the faith we have in this place, like the paralyzed man being lowered by his friends, because of their faith, you healed him. Lord, because of our faith as the Couples and Money community, may you intervene in their situation today. I pray for Cosma, who's been our guest speaker today, and I pray that, Lord, you will replenish him, refresh him, rejuvenate him, and just renew the energy that he has spent with us today. And Father, may you take him to even higher levels of impact and influence as he continues to serve you. We thank you for him, and we commit him and his family into your hands. We pray for every family represented here, the Couples and Money community, Pastor Moredi and Karo Anjao, who are the visionaries of this initiative. And we just pray that, Lord, you bless each and every one of them in Jesus' holy name. Amen. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. See you next Thursday, 7:30 right here. God bless you. Have a wonderful evening.